Well, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are when you're watching this broadcast. I'm coming to you from the beautiful island of Kauai. Well, not exactly, but I wish I was. Nope, still here in Amsterdam, New York, and still here in my office, as you probably already know. Anyway, I'm glad that you could be with me here today on our broadcast, God's Answers for Anxiety and Depression, part of our Time for Truth ministries. And we deal here on this channel, this is my personal channel, as you probably know, Pastor Ray Barnett. Our other channel is Time for Truth Ministries. And here on my personal channel, we will only be dealing with this subject once again until either the Lord takes me home or we have exhausted the subject and exhausted the people who watch it. In any case, we're averaging about 25 or so viewers per lesson, which is pretty much what I was looking for. I think it's going to increase based on some of the feedback that I'm getting. Yesterday was Memorial Day, that's why I didn't broadcast. But based on the feedback from Sunday's message, which is from the pulpit, and that is also on the Time for Truth Ministries YouTube channel. I got a couple of comments. One who really enjoyed the message, which is the same that you're getting here on this channel. And another was from someone who expressed that they suffer from very gripping panic attacks and wanted to know who here at the church they could talk to, but there's nobody here. Even when we're open, it was 3 years ago today that I lost my secretary to cancer, and this week I buried her in the Oakwood Cemetery in Troy, New York, which is a very famous cemetery. Lots of famous people buried there, as well as Civil War soldiers and so on. But anyway, there's not anybody here but me, so I referred her to this channel where she could get a daily broadcast. So I hope that you're watching, and I really do hope that this helps you, but you got to stick with it. That's what I've been telling you. Important. If you have any history of anxiety, depression, and so on, important that you're here for these broadcasts daily. Right, this week will be 4 days, but usually it's 5 days a week. And if not, then make missing very infrequent, because these teachings are dependent on review and constant review. And I want to also say that I'm a couple of comments from Sunday's message from the pulpit, which is the subject again. Keeps telling me the need is out there, which I already knew that. But when I see, wherever I bump into it, could be on Facebook, could be in the news, I continue to bump into exhortations during this COVID-19 isolation. Let me just say something here about that as well. We are not in lockdown. Lockdown is a term that has its origins in putting inmates in their cells, locking them in their cells, usually after a riot or even before one. If there's something going on in the prison, every inmate goes into their cells. The key, so to speak, is turned and you're in. You can't get out. Then of course there's prisoners that are in 24-hour lockdown, sometimes for life, usually for shorter periods of time. Anyway, just to make mention of that, we are not in lockdown, yet that's the term that we see being used. And so I say that to say this: when we continue to use language, is very important. Words are important. We all know that. And I'll tell you how we know it. If someone says, "Oh, Pastor Ray, I like your shirt," I'm going to say, "Oh, thanks." If someone says to me, "Oh, Pastor Ray, I don't like your shirt," well, not too big an event in the life of a man, but we get the picture. Words are important. And the terminology that we use in life is important as well. So if we have a population in America, let alone the rest of the world, who believe that they are in lockdown, and if they take the time, have the interest, or the intuition to say, well, what does lockdown mean? You're going to find out that its primary reason for coming into existence around 1970 or so, it was in the 20th century, is to refer to inmates. We are not inmates, we are Americans. And we are in voluntary isolation or in voluntary cooperation with the requests of our states and governors and so on at the federal level. But we are not in lockdown. That would be a very difficult, well, I'll say dangerous thing to do to an American. We began this country fighting oppression and tyranny, and God help us, I mean it, God help us if things are pushed to the point where people feel now they have to arm themselves and we have some type of war. Don't discount it. We've had wars on our soil before, and in the year 2000 or 2001, we saw an attack on our soil for the first time. Well, we could say that the American Civil War, but really for the first time since the War of 1812. Not counting World War II, when the enemy were taking down merchant ships off the shores of on the East Coast. Okay, so you get the idea. We live in difficult times. We live in dangerous times. We live in stressful times, and I'm seeing more and more solicitation that people are starting to really suffer from depression and from these being isolated, and the loneliness that goes with it, and the boredom, and of course being out of work, and people are filing for unemployment and they're not getting it yet, or can't get through. How many we got? 40 million or more now Americans out of work. There's a lot of Americans. Well, my subject is not COVID-19, though we could talk about that. My subject is to help you to overcome anxiety, depression, and mental health. So I brought that into the subject today to talk about the difference between being alone and being lonely. So today I want to just help you to overcome the loneliness. Now, by the way, this is part and parcel. Let's forget COVID-19 for just a second. Loneliness is part and parcel of the suffering that people with nervous symptoms and especially mental health disorders go through. They're misunderstood. I told you before that people with mental health issues, people with nervous symptoms have a habit of complaining, and everybody is stressed. The patient is stressed, the family is stressed, friends are stressed, people get tired of hearing it. It just makes matters worse. But to stay on point, it can gender a tremendous amount of loneliness. And again, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. You see, I'm a person who has always gravitated to almost two extremes. I'm pretty gregarious. I like people. I have no problem being around people, can talk to just about anybody. No matter if they're a little guy, 3 years old, or ancient. Doesn't matter. I just like people. I like to talk. I like to be around people. But all my life, I've also liked to be alone. Mainly, even on a daily basis, I just like to be alone. So I have this need in my personality for both, not one or the other. I don't want to be around people all the time. I don't want to be alone all the time, so that doesn't roll over into loneliness. This is one of the things that we're dealing with right now, I believe, in around the world. And I'll say we who've had nervous symptoms, especially depression. Well, of course, anxiety would be there too, but especially depression. Um, being in the situation in which we're in right now will definitely, or at least the potential is there to definitely augment the situation that you have by nature. But here's the thing. We have many people who have never had an issue with anxiety or depression. I think I want to just stick a little bit more with depression right now, or starting to have it now. Well, because the situation is, how would I say it? It's almost a perfect storm to create depression in people who ordinarily don't have it, right? So let's just talk about that. We have to be able to break through at the moment right now, since we're cut off from so many activities that normally we would take part in. And again, I'm zeroing in on people who have had a history of depression and anxiety, and you just were lonely enough. And now that you're shut in, and there's very few places to go to, and then we got this social distancing thing going on, and so people are either shying away from you because of this virus, or you get the picture. Being alone, in my mind, I just told you, my personality has always been a good thing. I like to be alone. I like to clear my head. I like to think. Love to contemplate, meditate, not like Eastern religion meditate. I mean, just sit and think. I've been doing this all my life, just sit and think. I sit there and I like to listen to the birds, look at trees or nature, and not do anything, not listening to music, because sometimes not even reading. Actually, I'm just letting all that I have read just to let it settle in my mind and roll it back and forth and just see, what, as I say, just see what's what. But too much of that, for many, many people, and I would say most people, not all, but most people, will gender loneliness. Now here's the thing. You that are lonely, you know that you can be in a room with dozens of people and still feel alone. And more so, once again, if you have an issue with anxiety and depression. Now, others may not pick up on the fact because that you feel lonely, because you're smiling, maybe you're talking and you're trying to take part of the conversation. So nobody's picking up on the fact that you feel very alone. So my point is this: you don't have to be physically in a position or in a place where you actually are alone. There's nobody around you. You can be in a very populated area and still be lonely. All right, the good news is that Christ said, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. Now, let me tell you, as a pastor, and I don't have the type of responsibilities that the very large ministries do with all of the activities they have and what have you. But I can actually say that for the average pastor, again, someone whose head is really in the game, they're really doing their due diligence to be a good and godly pastor. It was one of the first things, and I think I was talking to you about this last Friday, the last broadcast, that I was amazed when I went into the ministry. That was the first thing that I confronted, was the loneliness. Sitting in an office when we started our first church. I mean, we started it from scratch, what we call pioneering it. And to just sit there and realize I had no co-workers, I had no boss to tell me what to do. I had to figure it out for myself. And I wasn't prepared for the loneliness. Now, through the years, my wife and I have 5 children, and we have so many grandchildren now, and more coming. And you would think that at this stage of life that I wouldn't feel, that I wouldn't feel lonely. But I do. I'll tell you why. When I go home, I have to be husband. When my children were around in the house, but even sometimes now, then I'm father. Of course, with grandchildren, they're a whole different. If you haven't had grandchildren yet, they're a whole different blessing. But then I come here to the church, and then I'm the pastor. It is a rare occasion that I can go anywhere where I'm not in charge. So questions are always being brought to me. What about this, and what about that, and what do you think of this, and what do you think? So it keeps you thinking all the time. And so there's times that even when you're with people who are the closest to you, spouse, husband, wife, close friends, relatives, that you're experiencing loneliness. Now, in my case, it's often because of the fact that I'm in charge almost everywhere I go. As a matter of fact, when I get to go someplace where there's people, and the gym is one of them, I don't own the gym. I act like I do, but I don't. I don't own the gym. I'm not in charge of the gym. Whatever goes wrong, whatever's broken is not my responsibility. It's great. It's a short space of time on a daily basis and I'm not alone. But I'm not lonely either, even because I'm with people that I work out with and that I get along with, and I get along with most people I meet. It's a great feeling to know that I'm not in charge. I can just be me. I actually enjoy that. But when you're in leadership, you don't get to be you as much as you would like to. And if you are being yourself, saying to people, like a pastor was saying, gee, I'm just like you. Well, if that's the case, then you shouldn't be leading. Or actually, you're not leading. You're a follower. If you're going to be a true leader, you're going to be out in front. That means you're going to have to deal with things that other people don't deal with and aren't. You get the idea. So when it comes to mental health, you can deal with loneliness on a different level, primarily because people just don't understand what you're going through. For instance, people can say to you, well, I've been down before. That's what they think of depression. It's just being down. And you get a night's sleep, or my dad used to use the expression, you pick yourself up by your bootstraps, which, by the way, is true, as is a night's sleep. But when you have a chronic condition or a chronic problem with depression and anxiety as well, it's not that easy. So you try to explain to people this debilitating condition is not that easy. And most of you are not going to have, your expertise is not mental health disorders, and you don't have a background on that. So you're going to have an even more difficult time trying to explain what you're going through, and the people around you, even though they're trying to understand what you're going through, they don't. So sometimes even words that are designed to be helpful are not helpful, because it's exacerbating the situation, it's making it worse, and you feel even more lonely. Let me once again give to you the words of Jesus. I will never leave you nor forsake you. In the Old Testament, the prophet says, When my mother and my father forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. Look at, now obviously it takes a lot of faith, and we've talked about that faith is not all that easy. But when you exercise faith in the Lord, you have a guarantee that you will never be alone. Look at, Jesus is at the end of his life, and he is saying to the apostles, all of you tonight will leave me alone, yet I'm not alone, because the Father is always with me. I mean, the appearance would be that even Jesus, as a man, probably didn't enjoy loneliness. However, he gives us an example of a relationship with God, so that even when you're feeling the pangs of loneliness, and again, to stay on topic here, when you're feeling the pangs of loneliness because you're not understood and people don't, well, obviously there are some people who don't care about your condition, but most do to some degree. They just don't understand it, so they can't be helpful even when they're trying. If you have Christ, you're never alone, though you may be alone. Now let me connect this again to our present situation. And I would suggest that when you refer to the situation in America for however much longer it's going to last, don't refer to it as lockdown. You are not locked down. You are an American with certain or unalienable rights. Only prisoners are locked down. You are not locked down. You are under a voluntary quarantine or voluntary isolation, self-isolation. You're not in lockdown. As I said earlier, if we get to that point where the governors are telling us we're in a lockdown, my fear, and it really is a fear, my fear is that we're going to have another American Civil War. Well, I'm off topic, but you're not in lockdown. And even if you were, there's so many martyrs, by the way. If you ever want to read something interesting, hopefully you would find it encouraging, is read Fox's collation, Fox's Book of Martyrs. Read their stories. So many of them were put in prisons and were truly in lockdown. They weren't going anywhere. But even then, they found the strength in Christ. Remember one of our verses that we use, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Okay, let me reverse this. Going from loneliness to the need to be alone. And again, especially for those of you who do have ongoing issues with depression and anxiety. You know, life, as you well know, can be very stressful. And the biggest stressors in life are people, other people. So there's times when you just need to be alone. Jesus was alone, well, say from time to time. I think that he would need it less than us, but he did need it. And the apostles, at one point in the ministry, when there were so many people coming and going, that's what the scriptures indicate in the Gospel of Mark. There were so many people coming and going that they didn't even have time to eat for themselves. So Jesus said to them, says, come apart. Let's get away from here and rest for a while. See, Jesus, or let me say, being spiritual is not a 24/7 operation. Not for the pastor, not for the people, not for the ministers, not for anybody who's working for the Lord. It's not a 24/7, you can't take a day off, because God never takes a day off. Well, first of all, he did take a day off. Not because he needs rest, he's God. But he set a precedent, and he set an example, we may say, by setting Saturday in the Old Testament as the Sabbath. Sabbath means to cease, it means to stop, or to rest. For us as believers in Christ, that rolls over into Sunday because it becomes the Lord's Day. the day that he resurrected and initiated a new covenant. But we still have a day that's still a moral obligation. But keep in mind that God never tells us anything that isn't in the end good for us. He doesn't do it for himself. He doesn't need rest. He doesn't need help. He doesn't need advice. He doesn't need knowledge. We do. So the point is that even to be spiritual, I've talked to you about those of you who have a genuine ability and desire to help people. You can't do it all the time. You have to take time for yourself to be alone. Having said that, I'll go back to the main thought for today is how to conquer loneliness. First of all, turn the times where you feel alone, whether you can control them or not. No matter how you arrived at a feeling of loneliness, get creative about it. Read the Word of God, memorize it. Have times of prayer. Right, during this period of isolation and quarantine, I've been able to come up with a few things on my own. Remember, I'm shut out from my entire social life. I come to a church that's empty. I can't go to the gym. So I go from my house to this building here. I do these broadcasts and some other, work. And then I go back to my house. And everybody's getting tired of this routine where we're very limited to where we can go. But what I decided to do was to get creative about it. What things could I do that ordinarily time wouldn't permit? And you know what? It turns a situation where loneliness could become a problem into an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? I can get this done and that, or you just get creative about things that you could do that you've thought about. Anyway, prayer, the time that you spend in prayer, your prayer life, reading the Bible, even just simply resting. Depression can be depression can be a little bit sketchy on that issue there, because some people who are so depressed, they want to stay in bed all the time, and that's not helpful. So you need to get out and to exercise and all of these things. My point, though, is that you can turn your loneliness into an opportunity. And even if it's as basic as identifying with Christ in his loneliness, because he did experience, he's the Savior of the world, and he did experience, obviously, the betrayal of friends and the betrayal of those who once followed him, that stopped following him, and also the pangs of loneliness based on his mission, and on and on. You can use it as a time to identify with Christ, who knows what it's like to be lonely. All right, that's what I had for you for today, keeping in mind that as a preacher, it's very important to me, and hopefully to you, that I'm always on point, and I'm kind of hearing from God, because this is what struck me today before I got here, to talk about this loneliness that's going on, not only for those of you who have always had some issue with anxiety and depression, but also now those of you who have developed it during this time of quarantine and self-isolation and so on. Let me take a moment to pray for you, that God would help you today, that even if you're alone, not to feel lonely. So God, I do pray for those who are watching today. I pray for those who are truly feeling very lonely. And I'm thinking mostly today about those people who have just recently started to feel this way because they can't find any peace in this current situation. Lord, let them know that you will never leave them and you will never forsake them. Touch each one today, God, regardless of how they became feeling lonely. Touch them to let them know, with you, they are never alone. Well, I'll be here with you again tomorrow. Please subscribe to the channel Again, this is an indication to me of the interest that's out there for this subject, even though I already know the need is huge. I want to know how many people are interested in what I'm doing, and you can help me out by subscribing to the channel. Then hit the notification button so you know when I upload these messages or teachings, I call them, each time that I do, which is basically daily. All right, so what is today? Tuesday. So I will see you again here tomorrow, and I do truly hope that today God is touching your spirit and you're starting to feel a release and a lifting in your soul from loneliness. God bless you. See you again tomorrow. Thanks for being with me.